This is the Linguistics Podcast. Questions or comments can be directed to Twitter at LinguistChris or on WordPress, http://linguistchris.wordpress.com. Hello and welcome to the Linguistics Podcast. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be talking about syntax. Now, syntax is the subfield of language which is concerned with the formation of sentences, and specifically phrases. If you remember back, we've been sort of working up towards large structures in the podcast. So we started at sound segments, then we went on to phonemes, and then we went on to morphemes, and now we're dealing not only with full words, but with phrases and sentences. So syntax really focuses on rule-based phenomena. So that means that there are so-called rules of syntax which govern sentence formation, and all sentences will abide by a certain set of rules, and if they don't, if they're formulated improperly, then they're seen as ungrammatical by speakers of a certain language. Alright, so the first thing you need to understand how syntax works is that every word will have some sort of category. And that's not to say that every word must have the same category all the time, but rather that every word will have a set of categories which may apply to them. So, for example, a word like for, F-O-R, is always a preposition. Okay, always a preposition. But there are some words like swim, which can be in more than one category. So swim can be a verb or it can be a noun. In a dictionary, you'd see two separate definitions for that, but you'll note that swim really sort of means the same thing as a verb or a noun. It's got the same sort of basic idea. It's just that one is talking about a non-tangible concept, and the other is talking about an action. But they're both based around the same sort of idea, and thus in linguistics we don't really make a distinction. We just say that swim can be either a noun or a verb, depending on how it's used in the sentence and what its inflectional morphology is like. Now let me say something about inflectional morphology. Syntax really is not concerned with it. It's things like changing swim to swam. That's handled in the morphology. Swam, of course, is an irregular past tense, but we still say that the past tense morpheme is applied to swim to get swam, and the intricacies behind that are a little bit too involved, I think, for the morphology podcast, but it might be something that I handle in the future. In any event, we won't be concerned with tense in this episode. We won't be concerned with agreement in this episode, any other kinds of morphological issues, and those that weren't covered in the morphology episode, we'll simply gloss over for now because they're not really important to understand syntax. Alright? So, with that being said, there's a couple of basic sentence rules which apply pretty much to any sentence in English, for the most part. These rules will get you a fair amount of productivity in English, although they will not apply to all English sentences, because English, like any language, has some play in what it allows or disallows. So it should be said that the existence of one rule does not suggest that anything outside of that rule is ungrammatical. In fact, describing an entire grammar with a set of rules can be daunting because the set of rules gets to be abnormally large. But in any event, whatever rules we do put in our set should apply to at least some standard sort of simple sentences of English, and so that's what we'll be focusing on here. So most syntactic rules, they deal with splitting things up into phrases, okay? So in order to better elucidate this rule-based system, we will use an example sentence, which we'll use pretty much for the entire episode. And that example sentence is very simple. It's, Wilbur loved the girl with a passion. Wilbur loved the girl with a passion, okay? Sort of a dorky sentence, I admit, but it has certain features that will elucidate certain facts and make this rule-based phenomena a little bit clearer. Okay. So, first thing we want to do, if we want to see how syntax would split this sentence up and explain its structure, is we would want to figure out what category each word is in. Okay, so let's go word by word. Wilbur, clearly a proper noun. Proper noun, all names are proper nouns. Wilbur is a proper noun. The difference, of course, between a proper noun and a noun, not really much structurally. We simply say proper noun when something is a name for something and not a name for a regular standard object. So something like man would be a noun. Wilbur is a specific man. He's a proper noun. Okay, so loved, clearly a verb. Let's skip the for now, because I'll get back to that at the end here. Girl, another noun. With is, of course, a preposition. Passion, another noun. Now let's talk about the and for a second. Speaking in terms of syntactic categories, the and would be called articles in English class. If you remember back to your English class, you have direct and indirect articles. The would be a direct article. Would be an indirect article. In linguistics, we refer to these as determiners, and there's some interesting reasons for lumping them into their own category and not calling them articles. We call them determiners mainly because they serve the same syntactic function as words like those and these. You'll note that those and these are not articles, and yet they seem to work the same way syntactically speaking. So for that reason, in linguistics, we call the and determiners instead of articles. Okay. So we have then Wilbur, proper noun, loved, verb, the, a determiner, girl, noun, with, a preposition, a determiner, and passion, a noun. Wilbur loved the girl with a passion. Okay. So what we need then to fully elucidate the structure of this sentence is a set of rules which can give every word a connection to every other word in some way. And what we'll be building here is called a phrase structure tree. And you'll have to forgive the fact that this is not a video podcast, so I cannot illustrate the phrase structure tree visually. I will have to simply describe it based on its rules. So hopefully that will not be too much of a detriment to my explanation here. So the first thing, basically what we're going to do is we're going to work from the top down. There's two ways to do this, of course. One is to work from the bottom up, in which you start from the categories of each word, and you build your rules up from the smallest rule to the largest. We're going to do it the other way, because I think through audio it'll be clearer that way. So now that we've got the categories for each word figured out, what we want to do is go ahead and start from the top down. So we're going to start at the sentence level. So we want to know a rule that will generate a sentence of English, and by far the most famous syntactic rule of English is S, NP, VP. Okay, so let me explain what this means. An NP stands for noun phrase, and a VP stands for verb phrase, and S is a sentence. All right. And what the rule basically means, this would be written, by the way, as S right arrow, and then NP space VP. That's a general sort of standard for writing syntactic rules. And what it means is that a sentence may consist of a noun phrase followed by a verb phrase. Now notice the order is very important here. Not a verb phrase followed by a noun phrase. We're not saying that every sentence has to have a noun phrase and every sentence has to have a verb phrase and they can go in any order. No, specifically, noun phrase followed by a verb phrase. So you might be saying, well, what's a noun phrase and what's a verb phrase? Well, the way these syntactic rules work is that they're recursive. So each rule is applying to its own output. You have a sentence consisting of a noun phrase and a verb phrase, and you have another rule which tells you what's inside the noun phrase, and another rule which tells you what's inside the verb phrase. Okay? So sentence consists of noun phrase, verb phrase. That's a very standard rule in English. And I can tell you right now that Wilbur generates a noun phrase in English, and love the girl with a passion generates a verb phrase. And let me explain how those rules work. So let's start with the noun phrase. The noun phrase generally coincides in English to the subject of the sentence. Again, going back to English class terminology, the subject and predicate. The subject is the noun phrase in terms of S consists of NP and VP. Wilbur, of course, is the only thing we have before the verb in this sentence. So clearly Wilbur must be the noun phrase, but why is will be the noun phrase? Well, as it turns out, a noun phrase may consist of a noun alone or a proper noun. It may consist of a determiner and a noun. It may consist of a determiner, some a phrase, which is in this case an adjective, and a noun or proper noun. So this is how you generate a noun phrase. Okay, you have several options for making a noun phrase. The determiner is not required. An adjective is not required, but they're optional elements. And optional elements in linguistics, in terms of syntactic rules, are denoted with parentheses. So it would be det for determiner in parentheses, a for adjective in parentheses, and then n for noun, not in parentheses, because of course the noun is the essential piece of the noun phrase. And this gets me to what we're actually talking about here, which is called head-driven phrase structure grammar. The head of a phrase is the element in the subtree which gives the tree its flavor. And I'm doing air quotes when I say flavor. A noun phrase is called a noun phrase because it contains a noun, and therefore the noun is the only non-optional element inside the noun phrase. Okay? So, noun phrase, pretty simple in this case. Wilbur. Wilbur being the noun phrase. Now, what's that mean? Well, if a sentence can only consist of an NP and a VP, then love the girl with a passion must be a VP, and in fact that is the case. Now, VP creation in English tends to be a little bit more complex than NP creation, so we need to sort of break down what we have here. Let me just say that the VP rule, one of the VP rules that is agreed upon by linguists is that a VP may consist of a verb, a noun phrase, and an optional prepositional phrase. And voila, we have loved the girl with a passion. We'll actually break down into those three phrases. Loved, obviously, is the verb. That means the girl is another noun phrase, and with a passion is a prepositional phrase. So the girl, why that is a noun phrase should be clear now. As you know, the noun phrase rule is an optional determiner, an optional adjective, and a noun. So the girl is a determiner and noun. That's clearly a noun phrase. With a passion, now the prepositional phrase rule is a preposition and a noun phrase. That's the sort of basic prepositional phrase rule. And therefore, with a passion being a noun phrase with a determiner and a noun, with a passion is a prepositional phrase. So we have a clear VP, love the girl with a passion. So what we've done is we've made a tree for this sentence. So we have an S node at the top, S denoting subject. And you can imagine two branches floating down. One floats down to NP node, and the other floats down to a VP node. Then from the NP node, we have one single branch going down to Wilbur. He's the only element in the NP. But from the VP node, we have a further three branches. We have one going down to the verb, one going down to another noun phrase, and one going down to a prepositional phrase. Under the verb, a single branch going to loved. Under the noun phrase node, a branch going to the girl. And under the prepositional phrase, three branches going to with a passion. Okay? So this is how you make a phrase structure tree, and that is sort of the introductory syntax that you would find in an introductory linguistics course. We'll be making phrase structure trees for more and more complex sentences. Now, why is this important? Why should we care about this? Well, this is a tool for describing sentences of language, and in some cases it can be a tool for generating sentences in a language. When I talk about computational linguistics, I will talk about how these phrase structure trees can be sort of used in reverse. These phrasal rules can be used in reverse to actually generate sentences instead of simply parse sentences and label them. However, in this case, we're just labeling them. So what's the usefulness in that? Well, in one case, in language processing, this is actually very important because it turns out that there is some empirical basis for the existence of these phrase structure trees at some level. For example, trees which are very strange, which have crossing branches. And this is something I'll probably talk about in the language processing section. Actually, on my Twitter account, @LinguistChris, I posted an article out of UC San Diego, which talks about language processing in connection to trees which have crossing branches, crossing dependency, I believe they call it. And it turns out that they're harder to process for people. People take more time processing sentences where branches of the tree cross. But the biggest thing that this can elucidate is ambiguity, namely structural ambiguity. And what does that mean? Well, let me give you a slightly different sentence. This sentence involves Sherlock, and the sentence is, Sherlock hit the man with a red herring. Now this is where phrase structure trees come into play, because you can actually make two separate phrase structure trees for Sherlock hit the man with a red herring. Now how do you do that? Well, it's very simple. You can either assume that Sherlock used a red herring to hit the man, or you can assume that the man was holding a red herring and was hit by Sherlock. Okay, so let me say the sentence again. Sherlock hit the man with a red herring. It's structurally ambiguous. Structurally ambiguous, okay? In one case, in the verb phrase, the man with a red herring is a single noun phrase. And in the other case, we have the situation like we had with the girl with the passion, where you have a verb, a noun phrase, and a prepositional phrase. So the prepositional phrase is a sister of the verb in one case. In the other case, it's a sister of the noun. Okay? Sisterhood, if you can't tell, if you have two elements which share the same mother node, they are complements of each other. So arguments to the verb are the verbal sisters. Okay, this is how it works. So you can show visually that structural ambiguity using these phrase structure trees, which are generated by applying phrase structure rules. Okay, so that is syntax in a nutshell. The next episode will continue sort of building up your basic linguistic knowledge so that we can get into some more fun and more interesting elements of linguistics. The next episode we'll start talking about semantics, and this is where things take a somewhat philosophical turn and a more interesting turn, I think, and where we'll finally be able to look at some really interesting issues and start to get into language processing, how the brain works. And also some tips that all of you out there can use when learning foreign languages. Linguistics, of course, is very good at that. It's very good at giving you pointers for how you can be a better language learner and a better language user. Okay? I'd like to thank you for listening today. Once again, my name is Chris. I'm available on Twitter for questions or comments at LinguistChris. I also have a WordPress at http://linguistchris.wordpress.com. Thanks again.